You're listening to The Career Q, and on today's episode, we are talking with Erin Ewart, a career coach and recruitment consultant. She has 15 years' experience as a recruiter and has developed an insider's perspective on what organizations are looking for in the hiring process, and she uses this knowledge to help you navigate your job search and land the job you want.
This is The Career Q, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Dana Redmond.
Thanks for coming, Erin. I look forward to our conversation today.
Great. Thank you.
Today, we're going to be talking about what to do when you get stuck in a job search. So looking for a job can be pretty challenging and tough on the ego. So how can someone keep moving forward and really stay motivated?
Yeah, great question. It can definitely be a tough experience and frustrating, especially when you're getting rejected, which happens from time to time in the job search. I think there are a couple aspects that I always emphasize with people. One is to really make sure that you're budgeting time to do some of the things that keep you energized in your life. So whether that's spending time with your family, exercise, other hobbies that you have, just making sure that you are doing those things and not spending every hour on your job search, because that will definitely burn you out. And I've certainly seen that happen in a lot of cases. So that would be one. I think another tip I share is to really think back on past accomplishments. So it's easy to kind of get stuck in the negatives or the things that are not going as well as you'd like. But thinking back on the things in your career that have gone really well and the times where you felt proud of the work that you've done can remind you of the value that you bring. And especially, drive your confidence when you are going through the job search and the interview process. And then the third tip I would share is to really find other people who can provide you with some support. So whether that's friends and family who can just build back your confidence, or joining a job search support group or some kind of accountability group or meetup, it's a really good way to build relationships and have other people who are going through the process at the same time to share your frustrations and successes with.
I love that idea of finding some support group and finding other people. How would you recommend go about doing that besides maybe just your close family and friends?
Yeah. So that's certainly one way to do it, is to start your own. If you know other people who are going through the job search process, just getting even a few other people together on a regular basis is a great start. There are a lot of existing groups, actually. So even here in Seattle, there are a number of meetups that already exist for folks who are going through the job search. So if you do a search on Meetup or just a Google search for your local area, you'll often find different groups. And then another resource is often alumni chapters and things like that. So the universities or graduate schools that you've attended will often have groups or resources that you can join, whether in person or even online, if there aren't other alumni in your local area.
Oh, that's a really neat idea to think about, being able to network with other folks from your university or from your graduate school program that maybe aren't local to you, but that are still going through the same process.
Yeah. There's more and more resources for that. Obviously, LinkedIn is a great tool for that, to connect with people who aren't in your immediate area, and a lot of universities have other resources. Mine now has an online networking hour every month where you can network with people virtually. So there are lots of different tools and resources available virtually now that probably weren't even in the recent past.
Nice. So what do you recommend for somebody who hasn't had the results they wanted from their job search? Maybe they're not hearing back from recruiters, or maybe they are getting all the way through to an interview, but then not getting that offer. How do you help somebody? What can you say to them?
Yeah. I think the first thing is to really take a close look at where in the process you're getting stuck. So whether it is at the very beginning, some people really have a hard time getting clarity on what they're looking for. Some people have a hard time getting to the interview process, or as you mentioned, it could be getting to the interview process but then not getting the offer. So I think the first step is to understand where are you running up against challenges in the process, and then taking a closer look at that to understand what you might need to shift or change. One common thing that I do see is that people with your approach, if you're relying on applying to jobs and doing most of your job searching that way, applying online, often that is a place where people do get stuck because they're not hearing back. And they could be applying, spending hours every day researching and applying to jobs online and not hearing back. So I definitely do recommend taking more of a networking approach and accessing people in your network, getting informational interviews, getting referrals, and making sure that you're dedicating most of your time and energy to that versus online applications.
Yeah, that's an interesting kind of concept because you feel like that those jobs are out there, they're posted.
Mm-hmm.
I see all those things I think I can do. Let's talk a little bit more about that idea, that networking piece. How would you recommend somebody approach somebody within their network? I think most people have LinkedIn, and you see maybe somebody that's in your network that you're not a close friend with, maybe a former colleague that's at a company or has a position that might be, a title that might be interesting to you. How do you approach somebody like that?
Yeah, I think the first thing to keep in mind is to make sure that it is truly an informational interview request, and so that you're not going in with asking for a job or asking for a specific favor from the person. That may be the outcome if you have a great conversation and if you learn that there are opportunities that might be a good fit for you. But you really want to frame it more as, I'm very interested in the work that you do. I'd love to ask you some questions and learn more about your work and your company. So keeping it strictly about gathering information, about research when you make the request. I think the other thing to keep in mind is if it's someone that you haven't been in contact with in a while, that's okay. I think people are very used to being contacted by people in their network and open to talking with you. But make sure that you, before diving into your request, you set a little context, give them some information about what you're up to, what you've been doing, why you're asking to meet with them, and ask them, how they're doing as well before diving into making a request for their time.
Right. I've heard that, that networking is a two-way street. So
Absolutely.
How do you think that can or should play out sort of in your job search?
Yeah, that's so important. Just remembering that there's a lot of give and take when it comes to networking. And what I often tell people is that, always offer to give, something back to the person. And you might not always have something in the moment, but always ask them, is there any way that I can help you? Or what can I do to help you? And you might be surprised. They may want to meet someone that you know in your network, or there may be a way that you can support them in their work. But even just making the offer, I think, goes a long way. And then the other thing I think is that networking is kind of a long-term proposition. It's about building relationships over time. So you may find that in a couple months or a couple years, that person comes back to you and is looking for a new opportunity or wants to learn more about what you're doing. So it definitely comes around, and there will be opportunities to give back to that person. But I think always remembering that you have something to offer as well, whether it's in that conversation or down the road, there will be some opportunities for give and take.
Yeah, I think it is so interesting that, even as I've reached out and trying to get, folks to interview for this, for our podcast here, it's been interesting for me to reach out to some folks, and then that's led to other people, and then things coming back of ways I can help the different people that have come on. So it's definitely a two-way, as much as a two-way street as you can make it.
Yeah.
Has been interesting. So let's say that I've, got my reached out to my network. They've agreed to chat with me. They think they've got some folks at a company they know. And so now I'm going in and I'm, trying to reach out to folks that I don't know, but they're at a company that has an opening, and I'm just not hearing back. Like what could be going on there? What do you think?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things. I think one thing to keep in mind is that some people just won't get back to you, and that's part of the process. And I think that's one thing that people can lead to a lot of frustration or feeling stuck is, gosh, I'm emailing all these people and I'm not hearing back. And some people, for whatever reason, they're busy. They just don't get back to you. But I will say that following up is key. So I always assume that, I need to follow up at least once when I reach out to someone and ask them to meet with me. Sometimes they'll get back to you right away, but if not, I recommend waiting about a week and then sending a follow-up, because we all get so many emails. It's very likely that it might have gotten missed, or they might have meant to respond but didn't get a chance. So always follow up. The other thing I recommend is that if someone introduced you, which is always the best way to go, is to get an introduction, or what I call a warm introduction versus reaching out cold. You can go back to that person who introduced you and say, gosh, I'm really having trouble getting in touch with this person. Can you recommend a better way to get in touch with them? And sometimes they'll have tips for you. They might say, oh, you know what? Phone is a better way to reach them, or try emailing them over the weekend, or they might even offer to get in touch with that person on your behalf. So that's another way to follow up, in a more roundabout way. So definitely following up. And then I think the final thing I'll say is sometimes you have to come at an organization from multiple angles to find the right person. So if one person's not getting back to you, try to find another contact in that organization. And sometimes it might be the second or third person that you reach out to who's actually the one that you end up meeting with. So don't get discouraged. If the first person doesn't respond, keep at it, and eventually you'll find a contact that you can meet with.
Right. I love that theory of continue to follow up because they might just be busy. I know a lot of times I will build sort of a story in my head like, oh, they looked and they're purposefully, it's me that they don't want to talk to. And so sometimes it is, hey, your email fell to the bottom of their email pile. They didn't, it's not a name they recognize. Right. They're not immediately going to prioritize getting back to you. So sometimes that follow-up is the trigger, right, that will get it.
And it's hard not to take it personally. I always tell people, try not to take it personally, but it's hard. I mean, the same thing happens to me sometimes. I think it happens to all of us where we don't hear back. And it's hard not to think that it's something about you. But the reality is it's not. It's really not.
Right.
And so, you've got to put in the effort to at least feel like you followed up and you did everything you could. And after that, it's really out of your control.
Right.
Yeah.
How many times would you say is too many times to follow up? Like when do you become an annoyance, do you think?
Yeah. There's always that line between being persistent and annoying, I think. You've got to find that right balance. But I generally think following up once and then maybe one more time, especially if you know the person is extremely busy or they've been traveling or out of the office. After that, I think you have to let it go and move on to someone else. Once you followed up, sent the initial request and followed up max twice, I think at that point you can assume the person's probably not going to get back to you and move on to another contact.
Right. So you don't become that annoyance in their inbox.
Right.
Fair. Okay. So now you've gotten somebody at this company to respond back to you, and you've gone in maybe for an informational or talked to them on the phone a bit, and you're feeling pretty positive about it, but then maybe you're not getting through, you're actually not getting invited into interviews. You've had a lot of these, meet and greets with people at companies, but you're actually not getting invited to an interview. Where do you go from there? Like, what do you think? Where should you try to pinpoint?
Yeah. I think often that's a case of not clearly communicating the value that you're bringing or the types of roles that you're interested in. So obviously in that initial conversation, you're just asking a lot of questions, gaining information. But from there, you really want to follow up if you are interested in the organization and say, thank you so much for talking with me. I really am interested in pursuing opportunities here. Can you help connect me to the right person or the right team based on, the experience that you have and the opportunities that you're targeting? So I think a real foundation of the job search is getting clear on what you're really good at and how you want to use those skills and how you could use those skills for a given company. And so through those initial informational interviews, you're gathering some of that information. You're hearing about the problems that they have that you could help them solve. And then you need to go back and be able to make a pitch to them about why you're the right person, why you can help them solve those problems based on your skills and your experience. And I think too often people kind of wait for the invitation or wait for people to ask them to, apply or to interview for a job. And I think you have to be a little bit more proactive than that in terms of, identifying where you think you could be a good fit. And even if there isn't a role currently posted, getting in touch with or networking with the people in the team that you would want to work on so that when something is available, you're the first person that they think of for the role.
Yeah, that is a very interesting concept of even if there's not a current job opening that looks like the job you want or that you could fulfill, being sure that you are staying on their radar because jobs, job openings come and go and they think they might need something. And if they have somebody that, they can call in right away to talk about it, putting yourself at the top of that list.
Exactly. Things change all the time. People leave positions, new positions are created, things are changing really rapidly. And so I think being on people's radar in that sense is really helpful. And that goes back to the idea of following up, not just after the initial conversation, but finding ways to stay in in touch, stay top of mind, and even potentially offering to do, some project work or, get your hands dirty in some way or help out in some way on a short-term basis, so that they can really see the value that you bring and almost kind of try you out for a role once it is created.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is a very interesting way to think about it because so many companies will need sort of some short-term work done. And if you can get on that list of, hey, these are the skills that I bring, and if you even need this on a, contract project basis, I'd be willing to do that. And then the added benefit for the individual is, right, you get to see the inside of that company too. Because, it ends up being that two-way street and you want to make sure you're making the right choice.
Exactly. So many people go through the job search process just waiting to be picked or to be selected. But it really is, you are interviewing companies as well. You need to find a place that's a good fit for you. And so doing some project work or, finding opportunities to learn more about the organization in a low-risk way are really great ways to test out if it's a place that you want to be, especially if you're making a career transition. So if you're moving into a field that's different from where you've been or coming back to the workforce after a while away, those types of projects can be a great way to, really dip your toe in the water again and get some hands-on experience as well that will be helpful to include on your resume and to talk about in your conversations.
Right. Yeah, it is such an interesting idea that you can sort of, it's not just a not sit around, but you're actively think you're looking, but oftentimes you feel like you're waiting for somebody to get back to you, that invitation to interview, right? And I love that idea of, no, it's not necessarily, wait and let them invite you. It's reach out and let them know, hey, you're available. Hey, you're interested. And here are some other ways that you could get engaged with that organization or with that company.
Yeah, I think so. I think, going back to your initial question about, being frustrated, I think so much of that does from feeling like you don't have any control over the process. And so finding ways to take that control or to be more proactive, I think really help your emotional state as well, because they make you feel like you are doing things and you are making progress and setting the own terms of your job search yourself.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about what happens if you get to that interview and then you're just not getting that offer. What should you be thinking about?
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
And we're back, and we are talking with Erin Ewart about what to do when you are stuck in your job search. And before the break, we'd been talking about, if you've made it all the way to the interview, but now you're actually not getting that offer. And Erin, how does somebody go from there? How do you pick yourself up? Because when you go in for an interview, I know for me, you are really laying yourself out there, and that's probably when your ego gets the most attached.
Yeah.
And when you emotionally get most attached to a job, because you can walk out of there feeling like, I can do that job. I want that job. That's an exciting job, but I could see my future there. And then you don't get the call, or you get the call that says, no, thank you. How does somebody go forward from there?
Yeah. Well, I think it's tough to remember in the moment, but I think just recognizing that the fact that you got to that stage means that you probably beat out, hundreds of other applicants potentially for that role. So that's an accomplishment. It means you're on the right track and that you've got some great skills and your approach is working in the sense that it's getting you to that interview stage. So that piece, I think, is a positive sign. I do think when it comes to interviewing, it's really a skill, and it's a skill that you have to learn and practice. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily spend enough time on. We often think, well, I know myself. I can talk about myself, and you might do a little bit of prep or research. But I think preparing for interviews is probably the single best thing you can do to invest in your job search and making sure that you really get the roles that you want. So a couple specific things I would recommend on that front. One is always to ask for feedback if you're not called back from an interview. Some organizations may not be open to giving you feedback, but some will. And even if it's something small that is just a tidbit of information that they give you, that can often help you readjust your approach. So I had a client recently who did that, ask for feedback, and realized that she had a piece of experience that she hadn't been highlighting that the employer was looking for. And so she just hadn't focused on it and realized that was something she really needed to play up and highlight more in her background. So Things like that can definitely help you adjust and better understand where it is that you might need to shift your emphasis. And the other thing I think is just, again, preparing, doing a mock interview or several mock interviews, I think is a really good investment of time. So whether that's with friends and family, finding a career coach who can do that with you. If you're part of a job search group, as we mentioned earlier, that's something that you could do with other members of that group. But getting the opportunity to really practice and get feedback from someone else about how your answers are coming across, where are you clear? Where could you be more clear? That's really invaluable. And the method I always recommend to job seekers to prepare for interviews is called the STAR method. So something to look into. It stands for Situation, Task, Action, Result. It's a method of preparing for behavioral interview questions so that you really think through your past experiences in a lot of detail around, what situation were you in? What did you have to do? What action did you specifically take? And then specifically what resulted from that? And so if you can get used to sharing examples and stories in that format, that's what employers are often looking for and used to hearing. And it's a good tool to help you organize your interview answers and content in a structured way so that you don't go on and ramble or, so that you're getting the things across that you really want to.
That's interesting that you mentioned to prepare for that as an interviewee, because in my background as a recruiter, that was, early on how we were trained to ask sort of questions, to ask about the situation, understand the task, what action, and then what were the results, right? So it's turning that sort of recruiter training and hiring manager training on its head a bit and knowing how to prepare for that as the interviewee.
Exactly. And the more you can get in their head and think about what do they want to know? What are they likely to ask? And the job description is a great tool for that. So looking at the job description and seeing what things are they asking for, and then thinking about times where you've done those things. Where have you, what evidence do you have that you have those skills that they're looking for? And just really, as much as you can, trying to think about, gosh, if I was interviewing someone for this position, what would I want to know? And making sure that you've really thought through and prepared your answers to those questions.
Right. Yeah, I love that. So that's STAR. So it was situation,
task,
action, and result. Right. Okay. I love that.
Yeah, it's a very common. So there's lots of resources out there online that you can find. But just thinking through and structuring your stories in that way will be a big advantage.
Nice. Yeah. So what if, you go through the process and you don't get the interview, you get the interview, but you don't get that offer, and maybe there's not a lot of feedback coming on. Where do you go from there? I mean, I know from sort of experience and people I've chatted with, it's a bit of a funnel. You start out and, as a job seeker, you sort of throw your net wide, you talk to your network, and then those people, only hook you up with sort of a smaller number of people, and you keep going. And you're probably only interviewing with, one company or one or two companies, and it feels like all your eggs were in that basket. Yeah. And when that basket then doesn't hatch, if that's the right analogy, for eggs in a basket, what do you do? What do you recommend to folks to do from there?
Yeah. Well, I think moving forward from that kind of experience, always to try to keep as many, balls in the air or eggs in the basket or whatever analogy you want to use, but try to keep moving forward on a number of different fronts at the same time so that you don't feel so attached to any one opportunity. I know that's easier said than done, but really it also makes you more confident in your interviews because you don't have everything riding on that particular opportunity, even if it is something you're really excited about. If you're actively networking, you're actively finding other opportunities, then you won't be so tied to that one thing. So I think just keeping up that networking, acting, going full steam ahead until you have an offer in place is one thing that I would recommend. I think a couple other things, I recommend that people think about the job search in kind of 90-day increments. And so I think that's a good stretch of time to get to that place of having gone through networking, gone through the interview process, and then you've either gotten a job or you haven't. And it's a good time to reassess and say, gosh, I've had a number of interviews, they haven't worked out, and really do some deep thinking and reflecting on why that might be. It could be, as we talked about, that you just need to work on your interview skills, but it could be that you really need to think about the types of opportunities that you're going after and your approach, and you might need to readjust either the level of role, the industry that you're targeting. A lot of people, when they're trying to make a change, especially try to kind of make a big leap, and often you have to make career transitions in a couple of smaller steps versus one big leap. So it might mean going after roles that are a little bit closer to what you've been doing, but getting you closer closer to the thing that you ultimately want to do. But I think taking that time to reflect and assess and maybe enlist the help of, again, people who know you well, or a coach or advisor who can help you really think that through is a good step to take, especially if you found that you've made it through a number of interview processes but haven't gotten the offer. The last thing I would say is just to, especially if you felt like you had a good rapport with the company and you had established a good relationship, to keep in touch, because it may be, they may have had somebody else who was a better fit for this particular role, but if they liked you and they felt like you were a good fit for the organization, it's very possible that they could have something else come along that would be a better fit for you. So I think always, staying on good terms with the organization, reiterating how much you enjoyed the process, how interested you still are in working with them or collaborating with them in the future, just keeping the door open to opportunities, even if that particular one didn't work out, can often lead to something else down the road. And it could lead to them referring you to other opportunities as well. So you never know where the right lead is going to come from.
Right. And you never know sort of where those people will be in 90 days too.
Exactly.
Whether they're in a new place, a new company, a new organization.
Yep.
But in this thought about, being stuck and sort of being discouraged, can I just take a day off every once in a while from a job search?
Yes.
Is that okay, or do I have to think? Because sometimes you hear searching for a job, that's your new full-time job, right? If you're out of work, that's one thing to think that's your new full-time job. If you're employed and you're still looking for a new job, having two full-time jobs is a little challenging. And so can somebody take a day off? And
Yes, I give you permission to take a day off. Absolutely. I think sometimes you do just need to take a break. And a day or two, even a week if you need to, just to refresh, reset, take a break from everything, I think is sometimes a good thing and sometimes very needed. Just like with any job, you need vacations from time to time. You need time to recharge. So absolutely, I think taking a short break can be a great thing, especially if you're feeling frustrated or burnout. But I also say, then get back to work because if you want results and if you want to see movement, you can't take too much time off. But you raise a good point around, especially whether you're employed or not, really thinking about how to structure your time with the job search. So I mentioned earlier, making time for things that you enjoy, but also thinking about, how you structure your time during the day, how you're spending your time on your job search. Is it on the most high impact activities, especially if you are working full-time and you only have a few hours a week to spend? Are you doing it on the things that are going to give you the most return? So I think doing some critical thinking about that and making sure that you're spending your time effectively is another good thing to think about as you're revisiting or taking that break from the search.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to sort of unplug a little bit, to be able to go forward, or they say slow down to go fast, right? There's a few of these lovely cliche sayings out there that we could get.
Yeah, and I always say, your job search is like any other project, and you need a plan, and you need to think about how you're going to spend your time, how to be intentional. And I think sometimes folks will jump in without necessarily doing that thinking up front. So if you do take a break, it's a good time to come back and, with some renewed focus, set some goals for yourself and really check in with yourself around how you're doing and how you're keeping yourself accountable.
Right. And what do you do when maybe you've done some of that analysis and you realize, gosh, maybe I wasn't going down the right path. Maybe those weren't the right jobs for me. How do you keep from feeling sort of really disappointed? Maybe that you had just spent your last 90 days that were unfruitful.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wouldn't say it's unfruitful because I think we learn something from every thing we do, and especially learning that something maybe isn't the right fit is a good thing to learn up front versus continuing to go down the same path that's not going to be productive, or even getting into a job that you're ultimately not going to be successful in or not going to enjoy. So I think finding that out sooner rather than later, even though it may not feel like it, is a good thing. So just recognize that it's not wasted time. You've learned something from that. You've made connections that are potentially still going to be valuable to you, and it's just a matter of shifting your focus and thinking about, how can you take what you've learned during that time frame and apply that to your search in a new way so that you are more on target and you are more focused on the right path.
Going forward. I love that. Well, Erin, this has been great. I'd like to kind of round us up with 3 questions that we always like to ask our guests here on the Career Q. Tell me, what was your first job?
Yeah, my first job was doing admissions for a small art college in Washington, D.C. So it was technically an admissions role, but I found out soon after getting into the role that it was actually a sales role. So I was doing a lot of cold calling and trying to convince people to come and see the college and ultimately sign up.
Do you still use anything you learned in that? Or?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, a few things. I think one, I was very intimidated, as I think most of us are, by having to sit down and cold call people all day long. It's not necessarily something that I envisioned myself doing, but it taught me some great skills. It taught me not to be afraid of getting in touch with people and not to fear reaching out to people or fear rejection. And I think that's been a great skill to have throughout the rest of my career. It also taught me that I really enjoy building relationships with people, and I actually really enjoy kind of the idea of selling something, but it has to be something that I really believe in. And so that's what helped me transition into the world of recruiting, where I could sell, quote unquote, an organization that I really felt strongly about and that I really believed in.
Yeah, that's an interesting transition to go from a college admissions or a small school that's maybe they're trying to market themselves more than, it's not like maybe some of the larger schools where you're just turning down scads of people. You're actually trying to attract some people into the idea of, that was a recruitment role, right? Which then translates into corporate, small or big companies. Interesting. All right. So what have you read or listened to lately that you would recommend to others?
Yeah, so a great book I recently read just came out by some professors from Stanford that lead this course that's called Designing Your Life. It's the most popular course, I believe, now at Stanford, and they've basically taken the content of the course and put it into a book. And it's about your life as a whole, but a big component of the book and what they talk about is about your career and about how do you use the concept of design thinking, so basically doing small tests or experiments in your career, and how do you apply that idea of trying things out in a small way or a low-risk way to see if it's something that you like and to kind of go down a path a little bit at a time versus feeling like you have to figure out what you want to do or what you want to be for the rest of your career, which I think is just a really helpful philosophy. I know that's something I struggled with for a long time, was like, I need to figure out what I want to be when I grow up and what am I, what's my career plan and all of that. And I've realized that so much of, your career path is not a straight line. It's really a journey where you go on different twists and turns and you learn along the way. And so this book really gives you some exercises and formats and ways of thinking about that I think are really helpful, especially to people in career transition.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very interesting piece that you can sort of, they talk about like what kids are learning today by the time, if you have a kindergartner, by the time they graduate from high school, like what they have learned in kindergarten and the technology there will be totally different, will be nearly obsolete, right? And so if you can get yourself into this, design thinking, that way of working and thinking, you'll be a lot better off than if you say, nope, this is the one path.
Right. Well, so many jobs don't even exist yet that will be around in, 10 years or 15 years. So if you commit yourself to one particular thing, it may be obsolete, just as you're saying. So I think being nimble, being flexible, and thinking about how can you use your skills in different ways is a really good thing to get comfortable with and to build. Yeah.
I mean, I think about that now with just the podcasting and the recording business, right? Like, when I was in high school, I'll date myself, there was no such thing as podcasts. I had my tape deck. Like, that was my great claim to fame, was my tape deck, my cassette recorder, and I could record my voice and start and stop. But that was it. And if I would have said I want to be a podcaster, I'm sure my career counselors would have giggled. Like, it wasn't invented yet. So I love that. So it's called Designing Your Life. Is that the name of the book?
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting. And then it's a course, man. That'd have been a great course to take.
I know. Too. I wish they had it in my undergrad days, but yeah, they've got a website too with different resources and activities you can do. So it's a good thing to check out.
I like that. All right. So here's the last of our questions. Here is, what would your 90-year-old self say to you today?
Such a hard one. I think that she would say. That she's proud of me for taking some risks in trying things throughout my career. So even things like starting my own business and kind of going out on a limb and doing things that felt scary, I think have those are often the things that bring the biggest rewards. So I think having the courage to take some risks is something that she would be happy about, or I would be happy about. And then I think, something else she would probably say is try not to worry too much about having it all figured out. I think that's something I keep having to continually remind myself that, we can't possibly predict the future. And there's such a strong urge, myself included, to figure out what am I going to be doing? Where am I going? And, what's my next step? And to really kind of have faith that you will figure it out one step at a time. And that, if you do, the right things and find ways to use your skills and your talents, there will be different opportunities that come your way.
I love that, right? Just, trust yourself and other opportunities will come, and don't be afraid to take risk, right? So that's wonderful. Well, Erin, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. If folks want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think the best way would be to go to my website. So it's just erinewart.com, and there's lots of information there. There's also a form where you can contact me, and I'm happy to do initial consultation conversations if there are things that you want to talk about, or to talk about ways that we might work together.
Wonderful. Well, this has been so great. And hopefully lots of people can figure out if they're feeling stuck, what are some ways that they can move forward from that. So thanks for listening today. You can go to thecareerq.com and find Erin's contact information. You'll also be able to find show notes and other resources. As always, check us out on iTunes and leave us a review.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.